Welcome to iRise Conversations with Joan. Welcome to iRise Conversations with Joan. My name is Joan Nwosu, and I'm an award-winning author of the book iRise, The 10 Secrets to Getting Up When Life Knocks You Down. In many cultures, definitely in mine, sex is still a taboo and not a subject to be spoken about in open circles, let alone get coached on. No. However, statistics have shown that it is a fundamental pillar to success in many relationships, and understanding how to navigate it can lead to the deeper connection, the intimacy that we all need to get the fulfillment out of relationships. Today, we want to discuss sacred sexuality and how it can help you heal and be happier. Our guest today is Suzanne Najarian Goodson. She is a sacred sexuality teacher and fully certified sex, love, and relationship coach, working with men and women to reclaim and enliven their sexuality and heal their relationships. She helps people to have better sex, yes, and have happier relationships through a deeper connection with themselves, their inner divinity, and their sexuality. In her coaching, she brings an extensive set of tools which she has collected for over more than 30 years of personal practice and study. Her coaching style is a holistic method that incorporates the modern research and ancient wisdom from Taoist and Tantric perspectives. She incorporates breathwork, embodiment practices, meditation, and visualization exercises, as well as talk coaching. Welcome, Suzanne, to the show.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
So I don't get to meet many sex coaches in my world or in my life. So how did you get on this path?
Well, I had always studied, really, I came through a spiritual avenue. So I had always studied spiritual matters from the time I was very young. I was raised Catholic and I was told you couldn't miss church. So I was the child who, instead of sneaking out to go party, I would sneak out and make sure I made it to church on time every week, right? I was very serious always about my spiritual studies. And as I grew up and expanded into really learning from many other traditions, I found that this area, right, of our bodies and our sexuality in particular was ignored everywhere I turned. Even all the different teachers I worked with, it was like, that's either something to be overcome, to be risen above, or the best message maybe we got as women was, that's for your husband, right? That's for somebody else. And as time went on and I had married and had children, and I could not find any connection to my own sexuality in my marriage, especially many of us know after children, it becomes more challenging. I thought, I've turned this spiritual searchlight on every area of my life. Why not this area? And I started researching and studying and training with people, teachers, and then teachers. And I couldn't get enough because, like you said, none of us ever hear about this. There's nobody to talk to about this. What happens when I don't want to be intimate with my partner anymore? Or what happens when there's a mismatch in desire, or a communication problem about what I want or what they want, and there are so many other very common problems in the complicated world in which we live. So who do you talk to?
Who do you talk to on a topic that no one wants to talk about?
Right. Except me.
Except you. So yes, we're glad to have you here on the show today. So what is sacred sexuality? Because again, sexuality is something that is positioned as something almost negative, something filthy that you don't really talk about it. So what is sacred sexuality?
Well, what I found when I began to study this is there are many traditions that look on our sexual energy as this core life force creative energy. So if we think about it, if that sex is thought about as something dirty, but the most obvious outcome that we're taught to think about is having a child, which is this incredible gift in our lives, like bringing life into the world. So how could something so dirty bring something so sacred? And so there are places in the world where this life force energy, our turn on, our excitement, our desire is this predecessor, right, to creativity, to life, to aliveness, which the most obvious answer being children. But many of us know we have a sense of aliveness when we're deeply connected to a creative project or many other things. And so the idea is that this core life force energy that is in us, that makes us feel alive, is our sexuality, and that our practices around this are can cultivate this sense of beauty and sacredness, the sense of bringing in something bigger than ourselves. And many of us have had intimate moments that hinted at that. And when we have, we're like, ooh, I want more of that. How do I get back to this sense of my partner and I created something greater than just, two people getting down and dirty, which no harm in that either, right? Intense pleasure, increases joy and happiness and satisfaction in relationships. And if we do it consciously with this idea that actually turn on is something that is our very aliveness that we can cultivate and have more of, it's amazing. Amazing. I have to say, what can happen? Amazing.
Okay. So before we get into some of the ways that people can tap into this creative part of sexuality that you're referring to, let's just clarify. So is sacred sexuality only for couples? So people who are maybe officially married or formally married, or is this open to everybody? Because
absolutely everybody. Everybody has sexuality. Everybody has one. Even small children are born with a sense of their own aliveness. So it has nothing to do with who you're attracted to or if you are partnered at all. We all have this energy in us, and we could all use it to create essentially more of what we want in life, whether that's more intimacy, a child, a creative project, more love. It's sort of the starting place of really everything, you could argue.
Okay. So, okay, hey, I'm hearing great things. I heard creative project. I'm like, what creative project? But I do hear what you're saying. It is an energy form. So now the question is, how do people tap into this? First of all, how do you even discover what your sexuality is, and then what power you have, and then how to now use it to get some of the things that you just mentioned?
That's a fantastic question, because a lot of times we start so far away from what I'm describing. And it really depends on your history, what you have been taught, what you have learned, what has been your life experience, right? Many of us are taught just to kind of shut off down there. It's down there. Maybe in the shower you clean it. That's all we talk about. And the beginning is just to actually spend a few minutes breathing all the way down into your genitals, into your pelvic floor, to take a few minutes, maybe in the morning before you get out of bed, to just breathe and feel like our breath can go all the way into, and just breathe into our sacred sexual center, whatever parts you have, you breathe into them and spend a few minutes recognizing. People might want to just maybe have some appreciative thoughts for this part of us, right? To think about like how beautiful our sexuality is. That's something that most of us might never think.
Yeah.
Right. And it can be really scary at first. When I first started this, I was like, I'm not gonna think about that. We're taught more advanced practices might be even gazing in the mirror at our genitalia and saying appreciative things. That honestly, that turned my stomach the first time I heard of it. I was so afraid, right? And when I do this with people in practice, where I assign this as, often people have warm-up practices, maybe people can do this as homework or just integrate it as part of your life, just starting to change that attitude and reworking our entire attitude towards our sexuality as something that brings life and joy and pleasure into the world. And just the education of starting to think about it differently, it means we still want to obviously be responsible. It's with great power comes great responsibility. There's a great power in our sexuality. We see it used for good or ill in the world. So to start to think about pleasure as being something for good, pleasure that we can connect to within our own selves. And many times as women, we are taught our pleasure is for somebody else.
Absolutely.
So just reclaiming that as, the simplest, touching my face, touching my hair, noticing that being in my body can be beautiful and pleasurable in simple, sensual ways that aren't explicitly even sexual, can be a game changer. Just to start to live in our bodies with an appreciation of the pleasure they can offer.
Yeah. Again, these are topics and subjects that people, like you're saying it makes sense, but it might be a bit irky for a lot of people, especially the first time trying to really be thankful for these body pads. And like you said, we've been taught as women, it's not for our pleasure, it's for someone else's pleasure. But just hearing you saying we need to like go back, do some breath work, take a deep breath and just be appreciative, recognize what you have and the power that you have within you, and then use it responsibly.
Absolutely. Even just to take a few breaths in the morning and breathing in awareness into that whole area of the whole pelvic bowl, that whole area of our body can create an aliveness in our day that you would be surprised. I bet your listeners will really be surprised if they try this, how much it can change their day, because we're not then sort of cut off from sort of fully, half of our bodies, really, right? We're used to being taught it's good to come from the heart, or we use our head, but below that, nobody wants to talk about, right? But integrating our whole system by breathing all the way through and giving yourself time to really notice that aliveness comes from there, and thinking, okay, what do I want to use this aliveness for in my day today? Do I want to be the best partner or parent I can be? Do I want to create a child? Do I want to, right? What do I want to use this energy for? And then being intentional about it. Do I want to create pleasure for myself or with my partner? Do I want to, whatever you want, right? But knowing that we're often taught also like hard work and sacrifice is the only way to succeed, but integrating the idea of pleasure into our success is one of the biggest things I noticed, and you might laugh, is that people have a huge uptick often in their income and how much money they make when they start doing this work. And it surprised me when I first started practicing, people having really massive increases in income, people writing novels, writing a lot of creative work, going back to dancing. People, I now work with more than half of my practices now, highly successful creatives, screenwriters, composers, musicians, artists, because again, tapping into the whole full system and having everything online lets us use all this energy that is kind of just pushed down in everyday life. Even if we think about it, if I'm somewhere and I feel a little bit of aliveness or turn on and come into my sexual center, my first thought is like, oh, that's not appropriate. Let me just distract myself, push that away. Instead, if I think, oh, this is my aliveness, what do I want to do with it? I'm not going to harm somebody with this if I'm in integrity, right? And if you are struggling with being out of integrity with your sexual behavior, that's another avenue we can, and there are places, and we know in the world there are unsavory places where people feel out of control with their sexuality. That's still a way of harnessing and cultivating it for good in ourselves. We can teach it from that end of the spectrum too. I don't want to just say shut down is the only way. Sometimes people will feel like they're controlled by their sexuality, and that's something we can harness also. But to use it how we want to use it rather than being controlled by it or pushing it aside.
Yeah. Well, I've never heard this before. I think in the book Think and Grow Rich, I think he alluded to that a little bit, but most people who read it saw it from a male point of view, where the man can tap into that power and use it to be very creative and amass a lot of wealth. But I've never heard this before, where everyone has access to the same power, the same energy, and you can choose what to use it for. So
absolutely, because we were taught as women, you use that for making a baby.
That's it.
That's it. But also, that's like literally the biggest creation that we can bring into this world. Make all the skyscrapers you want. You can't make a baby unless you are, womb-bodied person. So, like, and yet we are assumed, because we're assuming I don't have access to that power. Of course we do. Of course we do.
Amazing. So if you want to make more money, tap into that energy. Don't just focus on the heart and the head. Let's look lower, the bottom part of your body, to really tap into some of the things we're talking about. So let's talk a little bit about relationships, because I know you started to talk about, how you can use this if you want to have more pleasure or less pleasure, or maybe you don't want to have sex in your relationship. Again, sex is something that has led to a lot of divorces. How can this work? Help people who are struggling, or who their relationships have just gone south, where it almost looks like there's no way out of this except divorce.
If there's disconnect in a relationship, often there's a lack of communication. And so one of the things I teach is basic communication skills. Now, those apply inside the bedroom and outside the bedroom. If one partner has shut down sexually, often it's the person who feels like they don't have a right to their own pleasure for whatever reason. In many cases, that's the woman. So When a woman has shut down and feels no desire, we work with her, and we essentially, we do the very work we've been talking about so far in our conversation, where until the person has to feel like they have a complete right to their own pleasure and learn how to speak for it. And that can be that what I have found, and it always astonishes me, is that suddenly it can mean I'm speaking up in my career. It can mean I speak up in my family for wanting a career or not wanting a career. And it applies in the bedroom too. So we always start with communication on two levels. One, me communicating with my own body. What do I really want? Finding out what that is, separate from anybody else's agenda. And that takes a little bit of work, right? To peel away everything I think I should do or should feel, and just discover what it's like to be in my own body and have a right to my own pleasure. That alone, if we did that for every woman in the world, we would be living in a different universe. Different universe. That means clearing trauma. It means addressing old things that are still hanging on in our systems. That's a chunk of work. And then there's the communicating with one's partner. And that I always give really basic, and there are, we can put ones on your website if you want for your listeners, very simple communication practices where we just learn to listen to each other, not interrupt, not need to fix. Often we let the person know we've heard them and start creating a space that's safe enough to talk about, what do I want? What am I afraid of? What's going on? And really doing it in a structured enough way that there starts to build some safety between partners, where both learn to have some vulnerability without feeling like they're going to be corrected, fixed, attacked. Defensiveness can all get set aside. And that sometimes that takes something as formal as a practice where we set a timer and we do it that way. And that can start to build safety and communication back in. That might be about everything in your marriage. It might be just about sex. It might be about certain hot topics. These are tools that can be used. When I was looking to choose schools for my children, we did a version of these just with the kids, obviously about just, everyday topics. I've done these practices on vacation with my elderly father about where do we want to go today, because everybody else was trying to guess what the other person wanted. And it clears up a level of muddiness around communication like that.
Okay. So communication is very, very key. So what I'm hearing from you now is you work with couples, and that can work if both couples are on board. So what happens if one person wants to heal and wants to restore or reignite the relationship, but the other person is like, I'm done, not interested? Because I know a lot of, especially like we alluded to, a lot of women are probably stuck in that. The women are always the one going to look for help, and the men are just like, oh, I'm perfect, there's nothing wrong with me.
The power of the feminine is so great that if we do this work for ourselves, it transforms our relationships, it transforms us, it transforms our lives. So if we have a partner who's disengaged and completely passive, the power of truly embodied feminine confidence and sensual radiance is such that it can, in many cases, transform relationships with completely reluctant partners. And if it doesn't, guess what? You're transformed. You're ready to go on to the next stage, whatever that looks like. It may or may not mean leaving the relationship. People make all kinds of different choices, and I support all of them. It really depends on what creates the most happiness, the most joy, contentment, and pleasure, because that is my job for you. And so in many cases, it is the woman that comes to me, but I always have men popping their head in the Zoom screen about, halfway through the year. I work for people either 6 months or a year, depending what we're working with. They pop their head and they say, thank you. I never thought, that this transformation was possible, or that my wife would want sex again, or that these things could come into balance. It always cracks me up when the husbands stick their head in the Zoom screen, because men want intimacy too, but they're also conditioned and taught to not talk about these things, the levels of conditioning. But when we ask male partners what they want, it's touching to me how much they are seeking the same things, but don't have any language for it. Any at all. They're just the same way it's like, don't talk about that. Relationships also fall into that category. At least we as women are taught, we're always talking about relationships.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so you work with women, you work with men, you work with them both on pleasure and other things as well. So I'm guessing a lot of people probably thinking, well, sex coach, that must involve a lot of nudity, because how else do you teach sex without it involving some, practical nudity? How do you, is that something that people should be concerned about, or how do you work with your client?
Such a great question. So if anyone is inviting you into nudity or sexual explicit practices in their presence, you want to really investigate that person carefully, right? And you want to really know what you're getting into. It should be something that should never surprise anybody. So none of my practices, my one-on-one practices, involve sexual explicit practices or nudity. They just don't. This is something where I create audio recordings or written worksheets of things you practice on your own. So in our session, we would talk, and then we would do a breathwork session at the end. And that's because we can reach deeper parts of our system that aren't reached just by talking, often by breathing, guided meditation, somatic work, where we're listening to the messages of our body very deeply. And sometimes it takes a little hand-holding to just breathe into our body and be present with our own sacred nature when we've been taught that isn't possible. But that's not touch, that's not nudity, that's not sexually explicit. That's not what happens. Then I might give you a practice, but I also believe, because of the culture we live in, less is more, and we need to go really slowly. So everyone has their own set of personalized, like Suzanne's prescription pad for here's what you would do before our next session. It's an audio recording. And many of them are, again, fully clothed. They're visualizations of energy within our body. If people want to work up to pleasure practices, that's done, again, with a recording that they would do on their own. And, or I might say, well, you might try this and such with your partner this week and let me know how that went. So there's no explicitness. And if there is, people should know. Make sure that you know what you're getting into here. Right.
Okay.
There are a lot of, things in the world we want to be very careful of.
Absolutely, yes. So I love that, and hopefully that really puts a lot of people's minds at ease, where you don't have to. There's no nudity, there's no explicitity involved, and it's just a lot of meditation, visualization practices. So what else do you teach on? Because I know you've mentioned communication. You've mentioned now you give them audios, you give them some assignments to do, and meditation, visualization. Those are more spiritual practices. So for people who are not spiritual, who might be thinking, okay, now here we are with the woo-woo stuff.
Right.
Is this only for people who are on the spiritual journey, or are there other practices that everybody can tap into?
We all live in a body, right? We all have, so yes, there is definitely a spiritual bent to this work. It is called sacred sexuality work, but and I have studied many, many traditions over many years. So whatever people bring to me, I work with. So if they just want to have more physical pleasure, we can do that. And if they want to resolve blockages in their sexuality, again, to me, the body is so sacred that if we just pause, let's say we say, whenever I think about being with my partner, I have this tension that comes over my body. Then we work somatically with the body. Let's see if we can feel that tension now while we're talking about it, and explore it and possibly resolve what's going on there for you. So we work somatically because the idea is that the body itself is sacred. It's the sacred vessel. Its messages are sacred. Whenever I think about that, I get a headache, or I feel my throat feeling tight, or whatever it is, right? We work with actually the sensations of the body and how they teach us. And we actually listen to the physical sensations. And to be honest with you, some people who come to me aren't even able to do that. And so we just work up to that. We work with, different parts of our personality. So all of us have a part that wants to get out of bed and live our lives in the morning, and a part that wants to pull the covers over our head and snuggle a while, maybe forever, right? And so that's a perfect example of we have opposing parts within us. We have a part that wants to connect with our partner and a part that's afraid to. So we start just listening to the different attitudes and beliefs within our own system. And so we might start just with parts and just viewpoints within ourselves, and then work into, the messages my body is giving me are also a part of me, because we live in a society that can be so dissociated. and work into the body. And then if that goes to something that feels like it's greater than the sum of its parts, to something divine, for people, wonderful. And if it doesn't, their relationship with themselves is still transformed.
So,
but I'm a little woo-woo. I think we just have to own that. Like, I'm in the woo-woo category.
so I'm woo as well. So it sits perfectly well with me. So I know that you mentioned that sexuality and sensuality is a spiritual path. What exactly does that mean? How can that lead to deeper spiritual enlightenment or growth?
One of the things that hints at that people might have experienced are those moments. Sometimes people have them in nature where they suddenly notice everything feels like it's in harmony. Everything's a little bit brighter. Oh, yeah. Those sense of being deeply a part of nature, and we sort of blend for a moment, and then it passes and we go back to normal life. Sometimes people have that sensation while they're making love with their partner, that we somehow blended into something. Wow, what happened there? That was a little bit more than just the usual fireworks of physical orgasm, for instance. So those moments are clues to more and deeper expanded experiences of what is sacred in the world, and living that through our body. And so the energy that we talk about, a lot of the practices are these breathing exercises that start to connect to our body's energy in the similar sense to traditional Chinese medicine, the meridians that acupuncturists might work with, or there are many, many traditions around the world that deal with these energies, and we start breathing them through our body. So if you were with your partner, for instance, and said, this time let's try something new, let's have some longer eye contact, move more slowly, and synchronize our breathing, let's just say, as an experiment, what would happen? So we start to learn to induce these bigger, wider, more blended, more luminous spiritual experiences. And like you said, not everyone might experience them as spiritual, but if you've ever experienced them, there's something different, there's something magical. We start to learn practices and techniques to create them. And then, for instance, we might say, I knew a couple that were writing a book together, and they said, let's devote the pleasure of our practice to sending the message of our book, which was a beautiful book to be of service to people in therapeutic circles, out to the world. And lo and behold, they were doing a GoFundMe, and the GoFundMe, it was remarkable how fast. I'm always like, don't be amazed when it works, but like, so you combining practical actions that we want to take in the world with devoting pleasure to it, with opening all of and there's science behind this. So it's not just woo-woo, although we do claim that as part of our toolbox. It's that when we have resistance to expansion, financial expansion, creative expansion into pleasure or love or intimacy, that when we bring all of our body online, and guess what? Sexual arousal lights up parts of the brain that aren't lit up in everyday life. When all the parts of the brain are lit up, and I'm able to then say my intention, it lets different parts of the brain know. And those might be parts of the brain that weren't online before. And so we can actually access parts of ourselves to achieve things that science shows us. Oh, you got all your brain online, not just the parts that think I should do this, or not just the parts that want this, but the ones that are deeper into our survival level core parts of our brain, to let us know, oh, it's safe to succeed. Oh, it's safe to earn more. Oh, it's safe to put my novel out in the world. It's safe to open up to my partner. So we actually work with the limbic system, with these primal parts of the brain that are lit up, because sexuality does that.
Again, I'm sure this is foreign, new to a lot of people, but it is phenomenal. And I do understand what you're saying about it lighting up parts of your brain that have probably been dormant forever, because again, we're just taught not to talk about, not to tap into that energy. A lot of people don't even know it exists, let alone how can I use that to transform my life. So what I'm hearing you say today is get into the woo-woo stuff. This is real. This is the truth. This is how the human body functions. We are all energy, and you either use it or it's just there, but it's there for our access. Everyone has access to it. You can create it. You can use it to achieve whatever you want in life. It is possible if you're only open and you're willing to embrace some of these practices.
Exactly.
So if there's big goals that you have or big dreams, maybe you should start looking into some of this stuff. And because again, like you mentioned earlier, we're thought that we have to grind, we have to suffer, we have to put in so much hard work. But here is another option where you can tap into that infinite creativity that is out there, that it's available to all of us, but maybe we're just too busy or we're just not paying attention. But we know that from time to time, and I know what you were talking about, where from time to time you just feel something magical, something mystical. You're like, oh, how that's different. And and it happens to me because when I was going to write my book, I had to tap deep into some sort I didn't even know existed. And it's just like, whoa, where did all of this come from? So again, we all have to, I think this is so apt. We have to be aware of this stuff. We have to know that it's available to every one of us. And now we're learning ways that we can tap into it. And it's not just about the sex part of things, but you're talking about all the spiritual practices that can help us in every area of our lives. But of course, the pleasure is good too. so if you want that, that's great too. So let's talk a little bit about pleasure tolerance, because I know we're all different, right? So what is pleasure tolerance, and how can people understand their own level of tolerance?
A lot of times we don't realize that we have a much greater tolerance for discomfort than we do for pleasure. So we know how to do the hard things, a lot of us. A lot of us have come through hardship, and we know how to knuckle down. We know how to do that hard work. But if you start to pay attention to, for instance, like that first delicious sip of coffee or whatever your favorite thing is to drink in the morning, right? And think like, oh, what if I really just tasted this and did nothing else? I love that first sip, but how long can we stay with those sensations, right? How much can we invite simple sensual pleasures like taste, like, the perfect breeze on your skin or the perfect warm water in your shower, instead of like, I got to get on with it. I've got to get through my day. The shower takes us roughly the same amount of time if you enjoy it or don't enjoy it, right? If I enjoy all of the sensations of a beautiful warm shower. But often we just are trained to rush through those things. If we reverse that and start finding all the little places of pleasure in our day, we start to notice where, oh, that's enough. I got to move on. I had one client set her Apple Watch to go off randomly during the day, and she had to find it was her assignment to herself to find something pleasurable in that moment. So the pleasure doesn't always have to be, well, focused on the bedroom, focused on this one part of our body, that we can start to expand it. Then conversely, when we do get into the bedroom, we find, oh, I need to hurry. I need to hurry to the finish. I need to hurry to my partner's finish, to my own finish, rather than a lot of the teachings of Tantra are about expanding the space of pleasure from the beginning of the experience to the peak of the experience, rather than rushing to this peak, but actually, how much pleasure can I have on the way there? There's not a lot in sexuality that we're taught that. So it creates this space. And I do think many women come to my kind of work, to this kind of conversation, feeling like we actually might be broken, or there's something wrong with our sensuality, or there might be something wrong with our turn on. And when we flip the script, we turn this around and we start to think about these small moments of pleasure and allowing them generously to ourselves, we find none of us are broken. We can not only heal from bad experiences or recover from, to be real, I was really, really shut down. To be the person on the radio talking about sex was not where I ever could have imagined myself. And I came from such a deep level of numbness. And I was used to that, going about my life, doing all the things I had to do. But there was a sadness of like, there must be something to this sexuality thing. There must be something to this. And so slowly cultivating what feels safe to our systems and gently expanding our tolerance for what is good and feels good and is harms no one is something that we could all use more of.
Wow. I feel like a lot of women can probably relate to that, where there's a certain level of numbness where it's like, if I never, I'll be okay. If I never again, I'll be good. But
right. And that's where I came from, honestly, except for the sadness of, I think there's something missing in my life, which was underneath if it never happens again, I'm good. But underneath it, I was like, but really, is that really true? Is that really what I want for the rest of my life? I have 2 young children, and this is where I'm going to end up. And so often, if we ask more deeply, there is a deeper calling there. And that is where many people start to have the conversations with me about, what can I do about this? Because it feels like my choice is numbness or doing it for my partner.
Yes. Yes.
And the truth is, there's an entire world of joy in between, in your body.
Wow. So any woman out there today who's feeling numb, or you feel like you've shut it down and you think you're okay, maybe now is the time to explore. It's not okay. There's more. There's a lot of space in between. And we should all enjoy. Again, it's not just about the physical part of it, but just everything that we're talking about, all of the things that comes with activating this energy and really tapping into it. So I really want to encourage anyone who's listening today and is like, okay, that's me. Sounds like me. Very familiar. Never, ever. Maybe now's the time to reach out and really, really get some help, because help is available. So for people who may be thinking, okay, or maybe they started this work on this journey of healing, how does it, because again, you just mentioned some people do it for their partners. How do you know when it's a yes for you and when it's a no and just a yes for my partner? What's the difference? How does your body feel?
It's really one of the most important things to learn for ourselves, is what our authentic yes and our authentic no is. And before we can even ask ourselves that question, we have to be willing to say yes to ourselves and no to someone else, and vice versa. What does it feel like? So it really, and for many people, this is an edge. And for some people, many people, it isn't. But to have a self practice, a self pleasure practice, where I start to get to know my own turn on. And I start to notice, and a lot of the homework I give is to really feel like, where is my body a yes and where isn't it? And that happens alone, because that can't happen with another person there. It's just too muddied. Now, there may be partners who are willing to be slow enough and caring enough to have no agenda for themselves. And sometimes we set it up where I'm going to offer you pleasure, and then the next time you're going to offer me pleasure, so that it doesn't have to feel like we both have to have pleasure at the same time. And that's a wonderful thing for couples to separate. If I'm all about what feels good to you, but I still have to know I'm willing to do that, and that has to be decided and discussed and agreed upon. But we never think about that, because it's always still this male climax is still the goal of almost every sexual experience there is. And so if any way we can separate that and take the agenda out of it. And often that is with a self practice of learning, like, what is really a yes in my body? Where am I ready for more or for touch? What sets that up? What context sets that up for me? Many women don't realize they have something called responsive desire, which means that we might not organically ever just get in the mood. But if we start from neutral, what conditions would create me being in the mood? And teaching that to ourselves so that we can then teach that to our partners. It's an amazing tool to think, oh, I may never have spontaneous turn on.
Yeah.
Not as common in women.
No.
And so, but I still want to have this intimacy in my life and this pleasure in my life. So what does it mean? Does that mean scheduling dates? And I always start people with scheduling dates with themselves, even if it is that sensual bath and just spending time with our bodies. And then whatever, everything from that to very explicit pleasuring practices starts to let us know what we want for our bodies.
Wow. Topics that we don't talk about. But honestly, it makes so much sense. If you don't know what you like, how are you going to teach it to somebody else? How do you put the responsibility of what gives you pleasure? How do you hand that power over to someone else? So it's more about you exploring, figuring out yourself, what gives you pleasure. And I love what you said about, so for some women, a lot of women, they're not going to get there organically. It's not just going to happen, the spontaneity. You need to know the things that can get you there.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we can ask our partner for them. If you ask me about my day and offer me a back rub and light a candle, you'd be amazed. And men want to know this.
They want to know.
They want to be successful. For the most part, the men I speak to want so much to be successful. And the differences, if you have a male partner, the differences in the way you're wired are so vast. And so if we don't know ourselves, we can't teach it to our partners. And they want to know. Sometimes the conversation is going to be awkward, but that's why we have practices to start up the communication. but often just getting to know myself, it flows over. It flows over so organically. We don't have to even worry about it. It's like, oh, the confidence to have my own relationship with my body. And that's the main thing that has the men popping their head in the Zoom screens and saying, thank you. It's like, oh, my wife doesn't have these layers of shutdown because she's more confident now. That's changed everything for us. It's not even about swinging from the chandeliers and knowing tricks. It's nothing to do with that, to be honest. We can do those tricks if we want, but it has to do with coming from something that's actually inside of ourselves, bringing out our own natural sensuality, which we just, you see, there are always some women you see and they're like, what is it about her? It has nothing to do with her age or her figure or what she looks like. She just has something, right? And it's just like there's something about the way she moves or lives in her body that's just attractive to us all. We think, oh, and sometimes those women are like, like the bees to the honey. It's like, what is it about them? It's this embodied, radiant confidence that comes with knowing ourselves and knowing ourselves on all levels, from the head all the way down to the very base of our energetic systems.
I think that's a big assignment for every woman listening.
100%.
And again, it is available to everyone. You can take the time to start to really figure out, connect with your body, connect with yourself. I think I've never been taught that, that's for sure. But again, from what you're saying, it makes absolute sense. I think that most women, somewhere deep down inside, we knew that there's something that we're wired a certain way, because when a man does something right and you're like, yeah, and when you just roll your eyes like, is that supposed to do, like, yeah, whatever, I don't care about that. And I think women are different as well. For some women that might be a turn on, for others it's like, okay, whatever. Or now it's like, can we just get it over and done with so I can get back to cooking or watching my Netflix or whatever. So I think this is really important because, like we've said, it is very key to a lot of relationships. This can help to build that greater level of intimacy, that connectedness that we're all looking for. And it's not just women, it's men too. Everyone wants to feel that inner deep connection and fulfillment. And it helps you heal. It leads to better relationships. And there's the money in it as well. It helps you be successful in every area of your life. I'm sure a lot of people caught on to that one. But it's all phenomenal stuff that you're talking about. And I really hope that people will embrace this journey and get started. Whatever little way you can start today. And I'm going to ask you for your first tip for people to get started. But I really want to encourage everyone to get started. I'm ready to get started on this journey. So for you, Suzanne, so for everyone listening, what will be the first starting point for someone who's thinking, I want this. I want to experience some of these amazing things you're talking about. I want to know what my body feels like. I want to know what brings me pleasure. I want to feel that inner sense of connectedness to the lower half of my body. What is the best starting point?
I think what I want everyone to know is that you are not broken. There's nothing wrong with you, and that there's nothing wrong with your sexuality. And if we start from there, and then I do think that breathing into, like taking time to breathe, a gentle, deep breath all the way in to the very, very pelvic floor, and sending breath all the way into your sacred sexual center, your genitals, and set a timer and spend 3 to 5 minutes just breathing and centering your focus in this part of your body, and then noticing what sensations. And you can, if you can, actually say them out loud, like, oh, I feel a tingling in my lower right abdomen. Oh, I feel warmth here or there. And because it starts to then wire consciousness to these very deeply unconscious parts of our body. So if the breathing feels like all, and then set the timer, 3 to 5 minutes, do the breathing, notice the sensations. And if you can also speak them aloud, it's a beautiful place to start. We start to notice and come alive. You would be amazed at just offering breath and attention. It's sensate focus is sometimes what it's called. It's an old practice. It's not a new practice. It lives in both Western traditions of science, and one of the places I love to geek out is where ancient sacred traditions match up with modern science. This is one of those places. You can start there, where pretty much throughout history, people know offering attention, breath, and focus. And let's add a little love while we can into that practice.
Absolutely. So for people who want more, thank you for that. For people who want more, who want to work with you, how do you work with clients?
I work with people one-on-one. And so anyone can schedule a 30-minute consultation with me to talk about what they're looking for. If it's a match, we usually cover the things like you discovered, how there's no nudity or explicit sexuality in our sessions. And then what are you looking for? So we go from there, and then we work every other week in usually 6 months or a year packages so that people know. And I have to say, the transformation people experience in that's a very short period of time, considering how long we've been given negative messages about our sexuality. And I find it's just, it's rare that we don't have people meet their goals and exceed them because of the power of the energy inherent in our bodies. It's already there. All we're doing is sort of clearing away the leaves and the things that have settled over it over the years and exploring what's already there. And when we come to life, people just become radiant.
I wish that for myself, for you, for everyone listening today. So if you really feel like you're at that point in your life where you really want the change, you want to do more than the breathwork practice, which Suzanne just shared, then now is the time to reach out and really get in touch. I will be sure to put the link in the show notes so that people can get in touch with you and really start creating the life that they truly desire and getting the pleasure that we all deserve. Thank you so much for being here with us, Suzanne. That was phenomenal. Again, this is a topic that people don't really talk about. We don't hear enough of it, but we can see just by this short conversation how powerful this is and how it can help people to heal and really get the fulfillment and happiness that we all seek. We all seek that internally. Thank you so much for being here with us.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And to all my listeners, well, I hope you did learn a couple of things. I definitely learned a lot. And I will see you same time next week on iRise Conversations with Joan. Thank you for listening.